So I'm David Laws, and I'm going to talk to you about mechanism and activity of ruthenium olefin catalysis. And this paper was done by Sanford, Love, and Grubbs. And anyone that knows anything about olefin metathesis knows Grubbs the OG, right? And so first thing we're going to talk about is what is olefin metathesis. And that's basically you just take two double bonds and you stick them together at the carbons, like right here. So that's what these two carbons are. And so there's several types of olefin metathesis, but the main types that are in this paper are cross metathesis, so two free alkenes, and then ring opening metathesis polymerization. And they do this with COD, so cyclooctadiene.
Yes.
All right, and so the previous catalyst they report is this ruthenium catalyst with the main difference is that the carbene is just the CH2 molecule, so methylene, and then they have their phosphine is tricyclohexane phosphine. So they said, based on their previous research, that the PR3 dissociation is essential to activity. So the phosphine falls off, opens up a coordination site, and then so they aim to improve selectivity and yield. So they base that on PR3 dissociation being the main driving force of reactivity. So some initial studies, or based on that idea, they decided that N-heterocyclic carbene ligands would be the way to go to improve the yield, and the one they settled on was 1,3-dimethyl-4,5-dihydroimidazole 2-ilidine. So that's that funky guy over there, and it attaches to the metal here. So you can see like these methyl groups provide a lot of steric interference, and that would help phosphines dissociate, make them crowd out essentially. So they noticed when they used this ligand that they had better reactivity, but their PR3 dissociation was slower. It was a lower K. And this was surprising to them because they thought, like, this is what drives reactivity, so why is it down? And then so they did a bunch of mechanistic studies to figure this out. So they had two main mechanisms of initiation. So to get to your reactive catalyst is essentially what they were looking at. So you have the associative method, and then so the first step is your olefin associates, and olefin is just a double bond or carbon. So your olefin associates in an 8-2 fashion. So you go from 16 electron to an 18 electron complex, and then your phosphine falls off, and then you go back to 16. And so they thought this is more likely because you stay in the 16 to 18 electron range. And then so you have this dissociative method, and that's where the phosphine falls off first, and you go from 16 to 14 electrons, and then your olefin associates and brings you back up to 16. They thought this wasn't as likely because 14 electron complexes are less stable. So then they collected a bunch of data. So their thermodynamic data stated or indicated that it followed a dissociative pathway because it had a high delta S of activation. So that just means because it required so much more energy, it probably was likely that it was the lower electron in the medium. And then they did some magnetization studies. I have no idea what that means, but they saw that your PR3 dissociation occurred, and they had, I think, differently labeled, or it might have been just a different phosphine altogether. I'm not sure. It was like phosphine star, and so they observed there was PR3 dissociation, and then it was trapping it. So that means that the first step would be to just get rid of that phosphine, and then their kinetics showed that the rate of initiation was directly related to the rate of phosphine dissociation. So that's what drives your rate, so it's your slowest step. And so the way they carried out their mechanistic studies is that they had this ethyl vinyl ether, and the fancy thing about that is that when it replaces this carbene, it halts your catalytic activity, so it stops. So you can't go forward, so you can observe the disappearance of your substrate. And then, so all of this reaction on the top is just showing you the phosphine dissociation. So Kb would be losing that phosphine, and then they have that phosphine start coming back in. So basically, all that data is telling them that it follows a dissociative pathway. And so what that means is they can get some kind of mechanism from that. And so they have their first step, your phosphine dissociates, and then you have that like open site, and the rest of this is still around that molecule, they're just not showing it. And so you lose your phosphine, and then your olefin comes in, and it can basically come in from the top or come in from the bottom, that's all that's saying. And then you, it comes in at 8 to 2, then it coordinates to 8 to 1, and then you get this cyclo or metallobutane. And basically how that breaks down is your electrons go here, and then they come here to form another carbene, and then you get rid of your double bond molecule. So that's the basic mechanism that they have. And in their paper, they weren't, I'm pretty sure they didn't have this all the way fleshed out. I just looked this up because I wanted to know the rest of the picture, because that's not satisfying to me, just leaving that metallobutane. All right, oh. All right. So then they made a large catalyst library to basically observe ligand effects. So they kept, so you have your two phosphines in the normal, like the original catalyst, and then they changed they changed the carbene and they changed X for the most part, and then you have your N-heterocyclic ligand here, and then they changed the carbene and they changed X as well, and they also changed the phosphine. So basically, what they found is that your N-heterocyclic ligands, they do lower your phosphine dissociation, but basically lower the initiation rate. But they result in higher overall activity because they favor the olefin association over the phosphine coming back in, because that's reversible binding. So the phosphine can compete with the alkene. And so basically they call that quenching. I mean, it can still go forward, but it would reduce your overall active catalyst. So the NHCs prevent that from happening. That's why they increase rate. And phosphines, they switch from the tricyclohexane phosphine to the triphenylphosphine, and they saw 50%, or not 50 times better initiation and better COD polymerization. And the reason why they want better initiation is that it reduces loading. So that for a catalyst, you don't want to use a lot of it. So if you can get that down as much as possible, the better. And they believe that triphenylphosphine, the reason why is because it provides more steric bulk, and so it's easier to fall off. And also you asked what does labelization mean, and that just means dissociation, like it'll come off with the metal. And then so they saw with the halides, going from a chlorine to an iodide, you saw 250 times better initiation, but lower yields. So they think that the reason why it's a better initiation is the iodide is much larger, so it results in, it crowds out the phosphine, pushes it off. But it may prevent olefin association because for the olefin to come in, it has to form, like, I believe the halides have to go from trans to cis, so they have to get right up next to each other, and if they're huge, then it'll prevent the alkene from coming in. And then they looked at the carbene, and the carbene was that double bond to the metal. And they saw that the better the electron donating ability of the carbene, and the bulkier the carbene, the better. So they had phenylmethylene and then an alkene, or I have no idea what I did. I have no idea. And then so they had phenylmethylene and then methylene. And so they saw that phenylmethylene had a better activity because it was able to better, oh wait, no, I see what I'm saying now. Okay, so they had phenylmethylene, and then they had just a straight chain alkene, and then they had just the methylene CH2. So the CH2 was the worst because it has the least amount of electron donating ability and the least steric bulk. And then phenylmethylene was okay, but I think the best one were the alkenes because they had better electron donating ability. And they think the reason why they need the electron donating abilities to stabilize that 14 electron energy. So the conclusions are, so the complexes that take all of these together and make great catalysts were 10 and 11. So you can see they have that NHC, and then so the X for 10 and 11, well, so X was iodide for 10 and then chlorine for 11. And then R was the triphenylphosphine, and then they both had that phenylmethylene carbon. And so 11 had a 50% or 50-fold lower loading and the same activity as most of the other catalysts they found. So that was awesome for them. And they found that the lower the loading and higher activity, they result in lower temperatures. And so one of the main goals going into this was to improve activity and also improve selectivity. So one way to improve the selectivity is allow for more complex reactions, so you can basically direct your reaction where you want it to go. And so the lower the temp, the more room you have to do that. And then they saw that NHCs have higher thermal stability because they more stable. and so that allows for them to heat the reaction up higher if they need to. That's it.
Yay! Question.
Yeah. Can you go back to the one where you're talking about the KB, that one? Yeah. What were you saying about the K initiation and KB?
So they saw that K initiation equal KB. So the rate it took from them to get from like this catalyst to an active catalyst. So with the, I think that's just with the phosphine off and the olefin associated with it, was the same rate as it takes for the phosphine to come off. So the phosphine dissociating was the slowest step.
Okay.
Just because stickler for symbols. For kinetics, which K do we use?
Was it a lowercase K?
Yeah.
Oh.
So those are equilibrium Ks.
Whoops.
So tell me again why delta S transition state is positive for the dissociative pathway?
Well, I said that it was because the going to that 14 electron intermediate required more energy and that to go forward.
Well, I guess we'd associate that more with like a delta H parameter. So delta S is normally concerned with number of arrangements, right?
Okay.
So when you dissociate, you're going from one particle to now two separate particles. And when we go through that in Gen Chem, that's almost always a driving force as far as an increase in entropy, because you're going to have a greater number of arrangements in that case. So you'll see that delta S transition state, that double dagger, as well as delta H double dagger, in lots of kinetic studies, because you can kind of see, based off of whether it's a positive or a negative, whether it's two things are coming together or whether it's splitting apart. You can also do that kind of same thing. They can look at very small changes in volume. And when you have a dissociative pathway, you'll get a somewhat small increase in the transition state volume. So it's kind of very similar, but what were you going to say?
They had the delta H double dagger data, but they said that was not as conclusive as the delta S one.
Yeah,
So
that's
sad too.
the fact that that's an increase that leads you to believe that's very easily split. For the magnetization, normally what they're doing, this is kind of would be Dr. Lee's bag, is where they can isolate the phosphine signal, magnetize it, and then see what's close to it in space and how that affects things. So that's how they're able to at least monitor what's coming off and what's coming on to their ruthenium. If you go forward, maybe one, maybe two, go back to the mechanism you had there. So what were you saying about it can either come in from the top or the bottom? Because the top is pretty much, you can't come in from the top because that's where that enormous NHC ligand is, right? Where your L is.
Yeah.
So is it more that it's just trying to show you that it can bind to either face of the olefin instead, not really that it's coming from the top or the bottom, but that it's coming from either the metal is attaching from this way if we have our R group, or it's coming from this way, so that would change the stereochemistry.
Yes.
Definitely. But yeah, I mean, having that enormous thing definitely makes it so that the olefins can only really come in from the bottom there. Go forward, another one. Oh yeah, one more.
Oh.
You said something backwards. So which one's bulkier between psi3 and ppH3?
Oh, the P-factor.
psi3 would be
Okay,
bulkier.
well, I guess then the labelization was just because it was more electronegative, or no, it's more just I don't know. Then why does it fall off better?
It is a good question, right?
Oh, okay, maybe they don't know, 'cause I thought that was the reason, but
It's a good question. So it would be bulkier, which that would help it fall off, and probably that's why it's the better initiate here. That would make sense, I suppose.
were you talking about phosphorus?
Yeah, since better initiation means that they want it to fall off, right?
That's what it
But you're
So
saying that when they
PPH
switch to the PPH3, they're getting the better initiation, so that is strange. So the other thing that might be coming into play is the relative electron donating abilities, because psi3 is going to be a better sigma donor than PPH3.
So it's a weaker bond.
Right, so
Okay.
that's probably the case, since psi3 is definitely a larger ligand. Good. Anybody else?
I was gonna kind of ask me, so is everything, because like you're basically causing steric hindrance on the above and below, is everything that you're trying to like kind of base this reaction on going to attack that R group, that carbene that's sitting right there?
No, so what happens is your phosphine falls out first.
Okay, this is awesome.
And then you have that open area for your alkene to come in.
Okay.
And then like the reaction happens with like.
So they're
then you
using
get
sterics
something
there to
that.
like limit how that's going, I guess, that's what I'm trying to say. So you have the top
Well,
and
yeah,
the
there's
bottom, and then you
stuff
move it.
everywhere else, so it can only come in at that one spot, which is what it is. But, yeah, so until the olefin associates, you don't have, like, you're not gonna get a reaction.
Okay, so the goal of this then is just to produce polymers?
Not only, so they did do the COD thing, but, they also did the metathesis part, because, like, these are both used industrially, so they, like, the goal is just to do the metathesis, so, like, and then, so whatever is better at doing the cross metathesis would be better at the polymerization, essentially. So, like, they tested them doing both things. But, yeah.
Yep. Basically, you want to you're making polymers or you're making more exotic olefins as far as making the R groups different on them. And I guess that last point for the 14 electrons, and you stated this, but just to reiterate, it is surprising that the dissociation pathway is the preferred one because you get down to that low electron count. But as he said, many things on the ruthenium are donating a lot of electron density, and so that's why you can go that route. That NHC is a hell of a ligand as far as a sigma donor goes. So that makes it okay electronic-wise. Yay! On to the